This is my class. I've got 14 boys and 14 girls. None of them speak Welsh, none of them have Welsh-speaking parents. When I got the pack, the Judaism pack, I tried to match up the Judaism pack with kind of the skills framework Venn diagram that I found. But it's the bit where it links developing thinking and assessment for learning. I'm sure you've seen that one. I kind of took the pack, which had loads of opportunities to develop these skills, and then just created some worksheets and some activities that would try and cover most of these things on the Venn diagram. I just showed them the language basically and did like a baseline assessment after one lesson, see how much they could remember. So I just kind of read them out in Welsh and then said, just write in English what you think it means. And Molly, who was like top of my class, got 11 out of 14 after one lesson, which was really good. When I said, you know, kind of Leithiau or whatever, she would get quite a lot of them right after one lesson, which was really good. So then I started doing some language games and some fun things to try and get them to memorise the language. So we did things like loop cards, and we timed it every time we did it and tried to beat our own record. So this was them doing the loop cards.
Pawb, beth ydy ddylon yn Gymraeg? Mae gen I person. Beth ydy choose yn Gymraeg? Mae gen I ddewod. Beth ydy covenant yn Gymraeg?
Mae gen I cyfamod. Beth ydy to worship yn Gymraeg?
Mae gen I Addoli. Beth ydy Hebrew yn Gymraeg?
Mae gen I Hebraeg. Beth ydy how to live yn Gymraeg?
Mae gen I City View.
Beth ydy wilderness yn Gymraeg?
Mae gen I Alwa, anialwch.
Beth ydy tablets o stone yn Gymraeg?
Mae gen I tablets o gar. Beth ydy twlydd yn Gymraeg? Mae gen I arwain. Beth ydy golden yn Gymraeg? Mae gen I deliwar.
They get quite excited. And then I did the test again, and this time I gave them the English and they had to write the Welsh down. And this was after a few weeks of games and different activities. And then Molly, basically, there's about 18 words there, and she knew all the Welsh and spelt them all correctly as well, which was really, really impressive. After they'd learnt a bit of the language, we then went on to the shadow play, the 10 Commandments, and we did lots of different activities for listening and writing and all those kind of things. So they wrote their own success criteria, listening out for a clip and listening out for the clauses that were being read out. So their success criteria was stuff like, I would see if the words are in order, then if they're in order, listen to them carefully. So in other words, do the sentences come in order of the dialogue? If they are, listen out for each one, listen out for the key words, make sure the words are pronounced correctly, concentrate on the word I'm on, listen to it more than once to check my answers. And then at the end, they did a self-evaluation based on the success criteria. When we first started doing the self-evaluation, it's just this work is neat. I was happy in the lesson, but we've started now to try and get them to do their self-evaluation linked to the success criteria. So she listened out for the key words. I heard the words, I didn't rush into it. I also looked to see if the sentences were in order. Dwi'n weno glist I glist. And this is just an example of them using their success criteria or generating their success criteria. Right, Becky, what kind of success criteria have you written for this listening exercise?
We've written a success criteria that's easy to follow and you'll get the answers right.
Okay, so what kind of tips have you given Chloe?
To listen out for the keywords, and when you hear a keyword, check to make sure that the sentence is the same, and if it isn't, check that you have the correct pronunciation.
Good. Molly, what do you think Chloe means by the correct pronunciation?
So you'd have to listen to see how the Welsh alphabet is pronounced.
So give me an example.
Double D is th, like TH, and double L is sh.
So if you were looking at ddaeth,
Yeah.
and you thought it said...
It could have been, you could have thought it said daith.
Yeah, so you need to know the
Correct.
pronunciation. Good. Is there any other success criteria that you've written, Ellie?
I would see if the words are in order, and if they're in order, listen for the first one, and listen out for keywords in the first sentence, and make sure you pronounce words properly.
Okay, do you think it's okay to just listen to it once, Kelly?
No, because you need to check your answers by listening to it again in case you got something wrong.
That's right. Any other advice, Lewis?
You need to make sure you're really concentrating, because if you're not like listening or concentrating, then you could easily miss a sentence and then just not do it because you weren't concentrating.
Excellent. And so they go on to just kind of explain their success criteria and how they're going to be successful in that task. And then they went on and did the task.
Y 10 gorchymyn gan Dduw. Roedd y 10 gorchymyn ar 2 dabled o gafel. Roedd e'n drist iawn ac yn grac iawn hefyd.
So they're listening to the dialogue there and they're just ticking whether they hear it, and you can see that they're well into it. They're totally on task and they love it. When we first started doing the Judaism, they kind of looked strange, like I did. How on earth are we going to do this? But as we started getting through it, because it was so challenging, they found it a great achievement. So they were well into it, and every time we did it every week, they looked forward to it and started getting excited. So it was like PE, maths and Welsh now was becoming their three favourite lessons, which was bizarre. I listened out for the key words. I knew how most of the words were pronounced. So again, they link their self-evaluation to the success criteria. So they're knowing what skills made them successful. And then if they go on to learn another language in high school, then they can use the same kind of words, and they can also use it in English as well. So the success criteria was generic. So I started thinking, we've started to tick off some of these things now. They're definitely challenging tasks. They're understanding their success criteria. They're learning how they're learning. They're self-evaluating. The teachers and the learners are mediating the learning. They feel safe to make mistakes. They're kind of on task all the time. So it was going really, really well. We did some group work and paired work. This time it was a really challenging task. We did the shadow play, and then I gave them some sentences to put together in the order, and the sentences are down there. And that, to be fair, I did it at the same time as them, and I got 2 wrong. But Lewis, the lad there, he came over and corrected me. I was like, thanks, Lewis. So this is them kind of figuring out how they're going to be successful in this task, and it just shows how they work well together and they don't mind kind of telling each other they're wrong. Right, Lewis, what do you think is the most important thing when you're trying to work out sentences that go together?
I think it's knowing the order of the story, because if you don't know the order of the story, then it's going to be harder for you to put them together. Because if you know the order of the story, you could remember what sentences go together.
Okay, good. So you know the order of the story, Molly. What's important now about the sentences? What are you looking for in those sentences? You know the story.
You need to look for the key words in the sentences.
Yeah, such as?
Such as dynastrio.
And have you learnt those words before?
Yes. And you can also learn from the basic vocabulary that you should already know, like eit and etel.
Okay, good. This was the video to show that they kind of correct each other in a nice... It only happens when your class are kind of get on well together. My class are amazing, really. They really work well together.
I Moses the name Mynydd means Moses went up the mountain.
Yeah.
What did he go up the mountain for?
Didn't at the mountain.
Because God wanted to speak to them.
Okay. So on the right, he shouted to keep it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He talked.
He talked to God. So put it together.
Okay, so
Moses went up the mountain to talk to God. Yeah.
So as Moses i mynydd i siarad gyda ti.
Okay, can Moses did go home. So Moses got
the Ten Commandments.
Gandhi.
I think it means Moses asked God for the Ten Commandments.
No, that's not right.
No. Moses
could be.
had. Yeah, I think
Moses was given.
Moses was given. Yeah, Moses was given
The
the
Ten Commandments.
by God.
Gandhi. By God. No, yeah. Gandhi.
What would go next then?
So, cafodd Moses y degfro yn Gandhi.
We then had to write some questions. This was the most difficult task, I think. They had to watch a video about Josh, and then they had to kind of write questions to interview the lad. So I wrote them success criteria for this one because they found it quite difficult. So I said, use some questions you already know, like beth ydy enw, and use vocabulary you're familiar with, the kind of stuff they do in Help Ahead You. Then ask new questions using new vocabulary with familiar questions. So beth wyt ti'n fwyta ar y Sabbath. So instead of saying, what did you eat at the weekend, which we'd normally say, then we changed it to, what did you eat on the Sabbath, to make it relevant to Judaism. So they came up with questions like, why is the Torah in a big case? And where'd you go on the Sabbath? How old are you? The old favourites. Where'd you live? What's your name? Have you got a dog? Have you got any sisters? You got any brothers or sisters? They're all the good ones are coming. Is the kippah comfortable? And what do you think of the Jewish faith? So there's a mixture of kind of bog standard questions, which you'd ask people when you first meet them anyway, and then some more specific ones to the Jewish faith. So they kind of watched the video and then they generated the questions. We then went to an actual synagogue with my class, and before we went, I had to teach them Judaism in English because they only knew it in Welsh. So I thought it was in Liverpool, I thought they're going to ask them questions, they won't know the answers in English. So when we got there, they were asking questions, and Lewis was beside me, he's like, what's the Ten Commandments in English? What's the Der Gochem in English? And questions that they only knew the Welsh. And, but they knew the guy was so impressed with their knowledge of his faith, I don't think he could believe it. They knew all about the kippah and the Torah and all kinds of things from the Welsh lessons and the videos and the shadow play. He was really amazed at what they knew. Enfys asked, I showed Enfys the PowerPoint and she asked me to get somebody to video me teaching, so I agreed reluctantly. Okay, edrychwch ar y sheet. We're going to be answering questions about the Myerson family, and there's some prompts here on your sheet. I want you with your talking partner to think, what do I need to do to be successful in this piece of work? Have a little talk with your partner. Okay, stop here. 12 for now. Right. So you've figured out what the questions mean. What about if you come up with a word that you're not quite sure about in the questions here? What strategies do you know about that you can use to work out words that you don't, well, work out these question words? Have a little chat with your talking partner.
Also, because we know some of these words, so some of these questions we may know.
Right. Okay, you come up against a word that you're not sure about. Now, you look at that and you think, not quite sure what that means. What strategy do you think you could use to work out that word?
Previous knowledge.
Yeah, so what previous knowledge have you got?
Say like you've heard that word before and maybe you knew what it was.
Molly?
You could see if the word like brown bread is the same as an English word.
So if it looks similar or sounds similar to English.
Yeah.
Is there any word there to do with family that looks like?
Yes.
Okay, don't think about it, don't say it yet. Is there another clue there?
If you're not sure about the answer and you don't know what it means, you can ask your talking partner if they knew.
Yeah,
You could use a Welsh dictionary.
use a Welsh dictionary. Now think about all of those different strategies. It might look like something we already know. It might be something to do with a family. It might start with a capital letter, so it might be the name of somebody or something, or the title of something. What do you think that word means? Have a talk to your talking partner. Kind of just reiterating the skills that they can use to kind of work out unfamiliar words. And then they did something really impressive. They watched a video and they wrote down, well, they worked out what the questions meant on the left-hand side. They knew some of them, and then they worked out the rest. And then they answered the questions either in Welsh or English. I said they could use either, really. So, who is the video about? The Myerston family. Where do they belong? To the synagogue in Cardiff. When do they go there? Or when's the video taking place? On Friday evening. And then what I asked them to do was turn that around and pretend that they are one of the family and then talk about it to me, which I thought was going to be too hard for them, to be honest. But I mean, they really impressed me. So I gave Lewis, I let him have the English as prompt, but he's only allowed to speak in Welsh. So he kind of looks down to remind himself of what he's talking about in English, but then he talks about it in Welsh. And this is Lewis talking about the video that he watched.
Dyma deulu Myerston. Mae nhw yn perthyn i'r synagog yn Nghaerdydd. Fi'n nos dydd Gwener, mae'r merched yn cyniau, canhwylliau ac yn gweithio. Mae bechgen yn gwrando ar y weddi. Dad yn gweithio dros y plant. Wrth y bwrdd, mae'r tad yn ôl gwyn a gweithio eto ac yn diolch I Dduw a torri'r bara a rhannu'r bara.
Beth mae teulu yn mwynhau, Lewis?
Mae teulu yn mwynhau bod gyda'i gilydd.
Beth sy'n bwysig?
Yw'r perthyn I ffydd Iddewig, y perthyn I Tora, I perthyn I Dduw a I perthyn I Iddewon. Beth wyt ti'n feddwl o ffydd Iddewig, Charlie?
Mae ffydd Iddewig yn ddiddorol dros ben. Dwi'n meddwl, beth amdano ti, Jade?
I'm ddiddorol fel ti.
And then I asked them to write a piece of extended, well, kind of extended for Welsh, not for English, to do some writing about Joshua, and they wrote as either the lad or the third person. They wrote some really good stuff. Mae hi'n fi'n nos dydd Gwener, roedden ni wrth y bwrdd efo fy nheulu, gwrando fy mrawd ar y weddi. So just talking about the family table. It took longer than I thought, but because I was doing it in RE time and Welsh time, I kind of doubled the time of it. So we were doing probably 2 hours a week, because I took an hour for RE, an hour for Welsh. So it took, I don't know, instead of a normal term, 12 weeks, it maybe took about 18 weeks to get all the writing and the reading and the language and everything. But over those 18 weeks, I think we covered all of those things on the Venn diagram, so it was definitely worth it. And then last week I started a new book, Carnival Caerdydd, and it was unbelievable because there was only about one word they didn't understand because they've done so much like really challenging work. Anything they come across now, they kind of know it, which is it's unbelievable. So that was my class and what I did with the Judaism pack. So, I mean, I'm a PE teacher, and I did it, so I think anyone can do it, really.
I think one or two points that I've just been thinking about as I was listening to James speaking. The one thing that he's just said now is that it probably took him longer than he would have expected, that it was about 18 weeks. Well, it seems an awful long time. But of course he's getting the Welsh and the RE out of this, and also it's the first time he's done it. So perhaps next time you learn from your mistakes and you think, well, perhaps I won't be as, perhaps I'll cut out on this little bit, or I won't do quite as much on that. But having said that, I think the whole intensity of doing that particular thing, as he said now, when they came to do perhaps something less difficult, yn Gymraeg, then it became a far easier task for them. So really it's honing their skills, isn't it? And upping the ante and making our expectation greater, instead of saying, oh no, we can't do that, then saying, yeah, we will do that. I think the one thing that I like particularly is James's attitude towards differentiation. He said, it's a bit like golf. You know, they all can do it, but they've just got a different handicap. And this is what differentiation is all about. I'm a little worried about differentiation because I had a really bad experience when I taught. I mean, I'm a secondary teacher by nature, as it were. But I had a year 10 pupil who would have spent all the time in the Welsh lesson if he'd had a chance. Not because he particularly liked me, although he probably did, I'm so sweet, but it was not that, it was the fact that in Welsh he was only that much behind everybody else. In English, maths, science, I mean, they'd long since left him. So Stephen was pretty happy normally in Welsh until this one day we were doing a while listening activity, and on his way out he threw the paper onto my desk and it clearly divorced me because he said I didn't get anything. And what I'd done, I had decided which words Stephen was going to hear, and I'd given him a simplified version of what everybody else was listening to. And he said to me with some disgust, the word that what I heard wasn't on that sheet. So what had I done? I'd set Stephen up to fail. He'd had nothing out of that task, and it was my fault. And ever since then, I've really looked at differentiation very, very carefully, because I think we have to give the children the opportunity to decide for themselves what they can do, because it can have two effects. One, it can make children very lazy. Oh, he or she doesn't expect very much from me anyway, so I don't have to come up with the goods. It gives them a kind of label, which I think is dangerous. So I like the idea of this handicap business and saying, yeah, you know, we can all get there, but some of us need a greater handicap than others. And of course, the whole issue of success criteria, it's probably not a new thing, but I think it's becoming to the fore a lot more now, because what it's really giving you is life skills, isn't it? What do we do when we go abroad? We look at a menu and we say, can't understand that, it's in Spanish. Can't understand that, it's French. Waiter, can I have an English menu, please? We don't even try, and if the waiter says, I'm sorry, I haven't got an English menu, what do we do? Do we go hungry? Of course we don't. We'll find the wine, won't we? Well, I will anyway. Even if I have to go and ask, you know, phone a friend, or, you know, take 50-50 or something. But if we're faced with a situation of going hungry or working it out, then we'll work it out. And I think that's what success criteria is doing, and these skills of getting children to learn strategies for understanding. And I think that's one of the main issues. The whole idea as well of correcting each other, evaluating each other's work, that has to be an atmosphere within the class, doesn't it? It has to be a culture whereby everybody's happy with it, that people don't feel, they're laughing at me, or they're decrying my efforts, or the teacher's always saying that I've done something wrong. If they're used to evaluating their own work and others' work, I think it puts them in good stead, and the whole idea of previous knowledge. What I'm going to ask you to do now, it's like giving somebody a magazine, isn't it? You know, and saying, well, I bought you a Cosmopolitan magazine or a Hello or something. You can't read it. Just want to look at the cover, you know, don't open it. So we've opened the door of this magazine to you. An opportunity now, perhaps for you to talk to your partners and the people on the table with you and see, you know, how workable is this? Have you, for me personally, you know, have you got a question for James? Is there something, you know, you'd like to ask him?
Originally, we were going to spend that long, so if you spend that long, I think the option is then if you don't
Lovely to see that you had so much to say. And that obviously the whole idea of beginning to teach through the medium of Welsh has obviously sparked an interest in you, and with the whole idea of seeing the kind of things that James has been able to do and so on, I'm hoping that is going to now give you some ideas about how you can perhaps start doing this. But there's nothing nicer, I think, than seeing it being done and then you think, yeah, I can have a go at that. So can we start efo group 1?
I think first of all we all thought, you know, how brilliant it is to see that obviously you said your level of Welsh wasn't, and I think that's what we needed to hear, because, you know, my level of Welsh is not particularly good, and I think it's having the confidence to know that you can do that, so that was lovely to see that. One question that we did have and come up with was, do you think that the impact, does the standards of achievement in Welsh throughout the school impact on you doing this? You know, one teacher may not be as confident and might love, you know, try really, really hard to deliver the Welsh, but might not have been as confident before. So can you still deliver this, you know, level of Welsh by just doing this standalone? You know, is it possible to do that, or does it rely really on them having a good?
I think, like any school, I think it depends on the route they go through the school, because like about 4 of our staff have been on Kim Kai or a similar kind of course, but we've got 2 classes in every year. So if they kind of go the right route, or well, not the right route, but the route where they get a teacher who's been doing Kim Kai, then obviously by the time they get to year 6 and I've done it, they've got quite a good base.
One of the questions which the Welsh Advisory Teachers Conference, which they asked, was about the attitude of parents, of course.
Yes.
You know, how do parents feel about this? And I think the way that I look at this is that parents are happy with whatever language you are using with the children, provided they're getting a good level of education. I think that's what parents want. They want to know that the children are being taught properly and are being taught how to learn. And I think that's their main concern, and it's welcomed, I think, in Victoria, isn't it? The whole idea that the Welsh is being upheld. It wasn't obvious in James's class from the video, but because Victoria School has very close proximity to the Myler Hospital, lots of doctors and nurses and so on are there, and the number of children from ethnic backgrounds and so on, different ethnic backgrounds, is quite large there in Victoria, generally speaking. And it's lovely to go into James's lesson sometimes and have them all standing there with their hand on their heart and singing Hym Lad Fy Nhadau at the beginning of the lesson. So that's good as well. So not only reminding the Welsh children of their Welsh heritage, but reminding the ones that we've sort of adopted, if you like, you know, that we're welcoming them into the sort of fold as well. Yeah.